Hello, I'm Justin the Wizard. I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. And again, I invite everyone to participate in this mindfulness exercise at the level that you find comfortable for yourself. If you need to disengage at any time, we always understand. Mindfulness exercises can be very individual. Today, we're recording on April 7th, and the events around the world have been testing our our emotions as a people, as humans, all of us. You might say that there's been a great disturbance in the fabric of reality. In these times, just control what can be controlled. Breathe. Notice something that you hadn't noticed in a while. Feel something that you maybe haven't drawn your attention to. Hold space for yourself and be you, because we're going to be us on this, which is a fairly magical podcast. So, once again, I'm Justin the Wizard, and I'm joined by my co host, Elena.
Hi, I'm Elena Lunt, and I'm here to be your chaos coordinator today.
Yeah. So, the Chaos Coordinator has a role, and
Dude.
the cards know very often what we're thinking and can help to guide us. So, we'll see what they have to say today.
That's right. So today I'm using the Luminous Void tarot deck by Laura Zuspan. This is a really interesting deck. The cards themselves are kind of wacky. Um, they're actually like an oblong shape rather than
Yeah.
rectangular. And yeah, they've got these cool sort of foiled edges. Um,
Gilded.
they're really neat. Yeah, and the illustrations are very interesting. I love them. A lot of people who have looked through this deck with me have told me that they find the illustrations to be creepy. Um,
Mm.
but I tend to sort of like those kinds of things. Um, so, my apologies to anyone who maybe does not vibe with the artwork on this deck. We don't show it very long, and then you don't have to look at it. So, shuffle their cards. Hmm. Okay, so we've got the Emperor coming up first. The Emperor, um, often a father figure representing, authority, control. Um, he likes to be the one in charge of things, and not much gets past him. So our next card is the Ace of Cups. The Ace of Cups gives us emotional growth, new opportunities. Um, sort of coming into the next level of things. And then our last card for today is the Eight of Swords. The Eight of Swords gives us a lot of fear and restriction, sort of being closed in and being held back with this one. But it's interesting to see it paired with the Ace of Cups. That's very interesting, especially considering what was on your mind.
You're not wrong. Uh, so before we started recording, I was sharing with Elena that I have had a supply chain problem affecting one of my medications, and it has been what I know is it's back ordered um, at the pharmacy, and so I have been using a old supply of similar medication, which is both forcing me to use a lower dosage and it may even be less effective on some of my symptoms versus the other supplier. I'll talk more about this, but first I would kind of want to talk about this reading because um, the first note that I took on the emperor actually was the word patriarchy, um, and then the first note that I took from you on the Ace of Cups being emotional growth. Well, I view the patriarchy as a stunted type of system, uh, a low
Mm-hmm.
emotional intelligence system and framework that does not account for the disadvantaged. It only accounts for the needs of the already attended to. Um, Emotional growth against that lens looks like inclusion of increasingly larger, you know, boundaries of what marginalization means to the general collective knowledge. So, and then in fear, um, I think as I think about those two things in an arc, there's always a fear that you backslide. Uh,
Yep.
and so you've got this kind of emotionally stunted card, um, and then this card of growth, and then this card of fear. It speaks to the cyclical nature of things, history repeating itself. For example,
Yeah, definitely.
uh, and I mentioned the date that we're doing this recording right now, and we'll be releasing it in about a week. Um, but the history repeating itself is one of the reasons for these kind of emotional activations that I'm alluding to. Um, Emperors that lack emotional growth and act out of fear, even
Mm-hmm.
uh, sort of come to mind. And now I'm going to sort of pivot over to this medication challenge that I'm having. And so, um, in our earlier episodes, I think this might have been episode 2 on label stigma when we talked about like neurodivergent diagnoses and
Mm-hmm.
there's a need to treat the disturbing things of your experience, right? There's a need to find peace in whatever ways are available. When your difficulties are related to imbalances in things like serotonin or norepinephrine, these neurotransmitters that are very key to how our nerves work, that's the role of the the drug classes that we call SSRIs and SNRIs, and I've had to try both. The one that I'm struggling to get is an SNRI called duloxetine, and in the U.S. there's the brand name Cymbalta. Cymbalta is one of the main medications that is known to be available for treatment of fibromyalgia because it alleviates the experience of global pain through the nervous system. Um, I believe it has something to do with its norepinephrine reuptake inhibition and its specific mode for doing that because it runs extremely counter to my experience without the N part of the SNRIs. The difference between SSRIs and SNRIs, a mouthful, is whether or not they are designed to prohibit or uh, yeah, to inhibit rather the uptake of norepinephrine. So norepinephrine is definitely important for me to have balanced in my particular mental health uh,
Mhm.
medication set. Um, and so I've been on this medication for longer than I've had any of my diagnoses except for obsessive compulsive disorder. Um, the reason why I was prescribed SSRIs first was to treat obsessive compulsive disorder, which is associated with serotonin imbalances in
Right.
clinical trials and things like that. So, um, I want to talk a good bit today about kind of OCD from a clinical perspective. I'm using the Mayo Clinic as a resource
Mhm.
that I trust for getting information about specific conditions. And I encourage patients of the medical system that need more understanding for themselves to seek it themselves on a resource like the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, National Institutes of Health in the U.S., or there are numerous trustable sources. And if you're not sure what those sources are, work with somebody that is, trained to help suss that out. That's a totally reasonable help to get because there is an awful lot of mis and disinformation out there. But anyway,
Mhm.
obsessive compulsive disorder. I talked a little bit before about how it's appropriately called a disorder. There's nothing about this that I don't consider to be a disorder. Um, and by disorder, we're really saying that it's a negative predominant set of effects. There are one or two things about obsessive compulsive disorder that aren't negative, and those are things like attention to detail and like hyperfocus capabilities. But beyond
Mhm.
that, um, obsessive compulsive disorder is so named because of obsessions, compulsions, and harm that comes from the two. So obsessions will have themes like a fear of contamination. And this is coming straight from the Mayo Clinic right now. So
Right.
themes like fear of contamination or fear of dirt. Um, Having a hard time dealing with uncertainty is one of the things that they associate with obsessions. Needing things to be orderly and balanced or arranged, lined up. Um,
Mhm.
and then if you have irritability is sometimes associated with this. They call it aggressive or horrific thoughts about losing control and harming yourself or others. Uh, I'm not a huge fan of how that's worded on this. I understand why they've put it there in that way. Um, but the thing that I want people to take away is that this isn't necessarily thoughts of harm or like ideation, for example. But anyway, if you're having an ideation issue like that, that might not be obsessive compulsive disorder. That is possibly something beyond obsessive compulsive disorder on its own. But it's really obsessions include the thoughts about losing control and harming yourself or others. You don't have to have any actual plan or any like actual intent to follow up on it. The thoughts themselves are enough to qualify as the obsessions in OCD. And this is where I wanted to get into the last bullet here, which is unwanted thoughts, including aggression,
Hmm.
including things of a sexual nature or things of like they mentioned religious subjects or trauma could also be a trigger for obsessions. And there could be other other expressions that count as obsessions. Basically, obsessions are behaviors that you are obsessed with in order to get some sort of nervous system reward via the obsessive compulsive disordered nervous system. So that doesn't mean that there's any like positive feeling to come of it. You're seeking that reward, and the system is sort of. My therapist and I like to say, actually, like we feel like our brains fuck with us um,
Hmm.
when we're experiencing the OCD type stuff, and so it's really, if your brain, if you feel like it's fucking with you, um, then you can talk to your doctor about getting a psychiatric evaluation for obsessive compulsive disorder, um, just to have a more expert opinion evaluate your situation. It's very individual and it's a scale. Like you can be more and less obsessive compulsive. So like I'm like a high moderate. I'm like just below the severe threshold, but I'm close to it. So I'm like up there in the difficulty space, but not as difficult as some people have it.
Hmm.
Um, so some examples of obsession symptoms and expressions in the real world. Um, I saw somebody share something on social media about like they had earplugs in to help reduce sensations in the airport,
Hmm.
and TSA removed the had them remove the earplugs, thinking that they were electronic earphones, and then they got set like on a table. And the person who deals with OCD was then unable to put them back in place in their ears. They couldn't get the thought of the potential contamination from that table
Yeah.
off of the object until they could later clean it properly or whatever needed. Uh, so that's an example. Or for me, I don't actually have very much time in crowds. I have about 10 to 20 minutes before a tap of intrusive concerns for viral contamination starts to pour into my brain. Um, I've mentioned in other episodes how I've got this viral nest, right? I've got a history of experiences where viruses are disruptive to me.
Hmm.
In that type of environment, I don't want to risk another virus reactivating my condition. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned COVID-19 when I was talking about that before, because it's a known virus that actually reactivates other viruses. And that's a thing that is kind of a emerging knowledge that we have about viral illness, is that one virus can not just make you sick on its own, but it can also reactivate old illness.
Yeah.
So that's a rough reality that we're facing about that. So anyway, that's kind of the obsession side OCD, and I just wanted to take some time on that. Now, compulsions are typically actions that you take that
Yeah,
because
behaviors.
because of the obsession, you feel compelled into your compulsions. So this could be compulsively washing hands, compulsively using hand sanitizer, compulsively checking that your front door is locked or that your windows are locked, checking your
Hmm.
phone for new notifications, checking your email inbox for new emails, or rearranging things into an order that is alphabetical, chronological, um, by author, by title, by whatever. Just like whatever makes sense uh, to the obsession
Yeah,
satisfaction. The compulsion will act towards the obsession's satisfaction. And I don't feel like this is often achievable. And the so some other examples of compulsions include ordering, checking, counting, ordering, strict routines, and demanding reassurance. In addition to things like washing and cleaning. Um, Examples of symptoms could be like that you wash your hands until the skin becomes raw. Um, like I mentioned, checking doors over and over again, checking the stove over and over again to make sure it's off.
yeah,
Um, Counting in certain specific patterns, like if you have a tendency to be like a 5, 10, 20, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. If you do in fives or if you do it in tens or just like you have a tendency to a certain order of counting, um, that could be an indication. Um, Repeating, and this is important that it's a like a compulsion when you think about this. So repeating specific phrases like a prayer or something like that, um, an affirmation of some kind, um, where you feel like you have to do it. That's where it crosses the line from like just like simple affirmation, sort of healthy meditative thing crosses the line into um, impulsive distraction from productivity and other things.
right.
So, you know, that's where OCD is a very spectral thing. There's a wide spectrum of different experiences here. And I just want to make sure it's clear that I'm not talking about people that use affirmations. I'm talking about people that feel like they can't stop their
Yeah,
use of that affirmation. Um,
they no longer have control over,
yeah.
when they feel they need to use it.
Yeah. And if you're trying to replace, like you feel like a thought is bad and you feel like you have to replace that thought with a good thought, that is an example of a compulsion symptom. I keep tripping over my words here. That's an example of a compulsion symptom as well, where your brain is fucking with you. And so it's like fighting back. It's basically
Hmm.
triggered to try to say no, 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 that's not a good thought. Here's a good thought. But your brain's not going, the part of your brain that fed you the bad thought isn't going to listen to the part of the brain that's trying to give a good thought because it's still obsessed with that bad thought. uh, this last example of a compulsion symptom on the Mayo Clinic is funny because it's arranging your canned goods to all face the same way, or just anytime you arrange all the labels of like all the jars and boxes or whatever.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
if you're very particular about everything being kind of aligned, which I am, this is definitely one of the ways that, yeah, even behind me, you can kind of see how I've got things sort of arranged in a way.
yeah,
Um, and yeah. And then the Mayo Clinic calls out what I've already mentioned: severity varies. And there's a different, they also say when to see a doctor. There's a difference between being a perfectionist, somebody always needing flawless results or performance, and OCD, where it's not it's not that you just want the real things in your life to be clean and arranged nice. It's that you cannot stop from attending to this stuff, right? There's the cannot turn it off part.
Hmm.
So now back to my med. My med helps me turn that need off. It turns off some of the obsessions and reduces some of the compulsions. I say reduces. One of my compulsions is skin picking. I hate this. I will pick at skin until it cracks and bleeds, and it's like a subconscious thing where I'll like not realize I'm doing it until the damage is done. Um, Occasionally, I'll like pick at a lip or something like that. If my lips get chapped and it starts to peel, I might pick at that, and then I've caused my lip to bleed. Um, or I can't help but scratch my itches. I know I'm going to probably cause damage to the skin, but I'm doing it anyway. Why?
Hmm.
I'm doing it anyway. I can know that it's bad for me and I can't stop myself because it's like super it's hacking my brain. Like this is a condition that
Yeah.
hacks your brain into doing things. So if your body has been hacked by something biological, the pharmaceutical chemical's job is to hack you back into
Yeah.
a state that is more functional for you, right? Less disruptive for you. Um, and so, yeah, duloxetine, which I'm going to use that term. It's the generic name of the drug. Um, Duloxetine is a interesting one because it's associated with treating fibromyalgia, which I deal with. I kind of mentioned how my neck has like a constant minor aggression. And I think that's probably related to my fibromyalgia, where like my neck and everything below my neck is kind of just on edge because my neck is never
Hmm.
fully comfortable. I suspect that's the main thing, but I'm not really sure. Fibromyalgia is associated with things like headaches, um, IBS, anxiety, depression, um, widespread body pain, and fatigue, as well as something that we call brain fog, uh, thinking related troubles.
Hmm.
So I've got this one med, and it was prescribed to me for both fibromyalgia and OCD. And I have had to revert back to an old supply, which itself was replaced because I learned that that supplier was actually not very good at treating OCD in the first place. So when I was on it, I was getting some benefits from my fibromyalgia, but not as many benefits from my OCD. I also learned that the ones that are good for OCD, they also have a secondary benefit for my ADHD. I learned all of this from my psychiatrist. And so basically, my understanding here is that certain manufacturers follow a formulation process to get to the molecule of duloxetine that works well for people with fibromyalgia and not as well for people with OCD. A few small number of manufacturers follow a process that makes it good at doing both.
Okay.
And my psychiatrist knew which manufacturers those were and passed that information along to my pharmacy, and I started getting that supplier. And I've been getting that supplier since then. And I've also been doing way better on my OCD symptoms since then until about a month ago. And so now I've been a couple weeks now out of my full dosage proper manufacturer's supply, and I've been using instead the supply that I had left over from before, and it's a lower dose, so my fibromyalgia is not as treated, not as strongly treated at least. Uh,
Hmm.
and my OCD is much less well treated. And I'm also noticing either it's brain fog or it's ADHD spiking, and I'm not sure. Um, so, yeah, I've shared a bunch now about this. What questions might you have as I'm starting to feel like I'm rambling and this is probably interesting?
I mean, it is definitely really interesting. I mean, I didn't know the difference between the SSRI and the SNRI before. Like I take an SSRI. I have for many years. Um, yeah, I wasn't aware of the difference before. So yeah, it's been really interesting that that one medication can sort of cover so much ground. Um, whether some of that is through just side effects that it just happens to do that. Um, yeah, that's it's really interesting how these things can have different effects for different people.
Totally. And it's also really frustrating how, if I'm honest, it's really frustrating that we can call a medication a flibit, and flibit doesn't do
Hmm.
the same thing as every other flibit.
Right.
And it's like if I get prescribed flibits, I better be able to take flibits and get flibit effects. But that's not the
Right.
system that we've got. We've got um, molecular ownership is basically when they patent a molecule, pharmaceutical companies are patenting a shape of matter. I don't know what gives them that right. But they're also patenting, I guess, what I don't mind as much that they patent, but this is where the problem comes from. I don't mind as much that they patent the process.
Hmm.
So now I do mind in that when they patent the process and somebody else decides not to buy the patent and apply it to their workflow, and they instead reinvent that wheel in a different way. So now we've got two or more processes that produce the same molecule, duloxetine, and they have to probably pay or wait until it goes into its generic life cycle. Like there's a
Yeah.
branded life cycle and there's a generic life cycle that comes after it in the U.S. at least. I don't know how it is everywhere else, but in the branded life cycle, you had to get Cymbalta for a while, or I think there might
Yeah.
have also been a couple other brands that are basically the same molecule, but it had to be the brand names and not the generics just weren't available yet. And then after a certain number of years, pharmaceuticals no longer have the exclusive rights, and then others get the ability to produce the generics. So the generics, if they apply the patents that made the original, then they're going to have exactly the same thing. If they
Hmm.
don't pay the money to apply those patents and instead try to reinvent it because they think they can do it cheaper, then they might have a slightly different effect. And I think that's kind of where the difference between manufacturers comes in. So, not getting
Yeah.
into like which manufacturers specifically I had approved for my medication. Um, the point is just that I think that it's kind of like a effect of the patenting system for pharmaceuticals that
Yeah.
has led to ultimately a supply chain shortage for a specific section of a specific medication suppliers. And I don't know if it's because of some like Persian Gulf related supply issue or not. I just know it's on back order. I don't know if
Yeah.
the med itself is on a boat in the Persian Gulf. I don't know if they need LNG. I don't know if it's not related to that at all. I just know it's on back order. So
Right.
who knows? Um, and yeah. Now, all right, back to the cards. The cards are on my head a lot. This was a great reading today. Uh, the reading itself maps very closely to the OCD experience because um, you might think of somebody with OCD. The OCD itself is kind of a personifiable thing,
Hmm.
and a little emperor that
Yeah.
is in their head that is sending orders with authority.
Yeah. He wants control.
Yeah. Desperately. And
Yeah.
in order to achieve emotional growth in that environment, in order to find opportunities, in order to level up, you do have to overcome the fear and restriction and traps of following that authority. And sometimes you need chemical help to do it. And
Hmm.
that is where these medications really come in, not for everyone, for those people for whom it is clinically appropriate. If you're one of the people that tries one of these medications and you immediately like feel terrible and you need to stop, that's your story.
Hmm.
If you're one of the people that takes one of these meds and you start getting immediate help, that's also your story. And I know people that have had the very opposite experience of mine, where the medications that help me make them feel 20 times worse. Um, I will caution anybody with a strong history of trauma that trying to seek chemical assistance for trauma related pain sort of discounts the source of the problem being experienced. Um, you would never expect to. I'm going to use Luke Skywalker's hand as an example. Okay, so like um, Luke Skywalker's hand gets cut off. You can replace it with a prosthetic,
Yeah.
but nothing takes away the memory of having your hand removed from the rest of your body, as Luke Skywalker's was.
Hmm.
So Luke Skywalker now, possibly like Anakin Skywalker before him, um, potentially has a like a trauma response to that type of threat, even perceived threat.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're fictional characters, so I have no idea. They don't have real thoughts or emotions. They're fictional characters. But I can imagine that somebody who deals with a traumatic event could develop obsessive compulsive tendencies as a result of their trauma
Hmm.
that supersede the ability to be treated by medications because it's really about the trauma. It's not about your
Right.
chemical imbalance at all. So the point is when the root of your mental health concerns goes back to experience and like objective reality, your solution is probably therapy or maybe mental health counseling.
Yeah.
Um, and if I was sitting in front of somebody as a coach, and I determined that, I would make that referral and not be able to do that work. That's not what I do. Um, so the important thing to keep in mind is that, you know, these are These are all things where there's a lot of need to seek expert help.
Yeah.
And I know that can be very difficult, especially if you deal with OCD, because sometimes the OCD experience leaves you feeling like the expert, in a sense that you feel like nobody understands the way that you understand.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thing is, you know, the okay. Do you know the? It's like an idiom. The man asked the fish how the water, and the fish said, "What water?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you ask an OCD person who is not diagnosed, um, what's their experience of their obsessions today, they might say, "What obsessions?"
Right.
Right. So my point there is just you have to you have to be where you're at, and if you feel like this is resonating with you, any of this, um, the power of silence to hear your thoughts can be enlightening.
Yeah. So did it come as a surprise when you were diagnosed? Like, was that a part of the
Actually,
process?
kind of. I'm glad you asked that. So yeah, kind of. When I got my soft obsessive compulsive diagnosis, I say soft, and then I got a hard diagnosis, and they're a year apart.
Right, because it's going to be
Uh,
suggested first.
yeah, and so I was basically diagnosed with obsessive compulsive tendencies and um, specific fear. Right, the crowds fear that I alluded to was
Hmm.
diagnosed as a specific fear, a specific phobia, basically. Um, but yeah, the introduction of obsessive compulsive at that point was very surprising, and it was not something that I was claiming on my own prior to that. I don't even think I was one of the people in my like my pre-diagnosed life. I don't feel like I was one of the people that was even saying like everyone's a little OCD or I'm
Mm-hmm.
so OCD. I don't feel like I was that, but I might have said those things at some point in my life. I'm not going to completely discount it, or
Hmm.
act like I've never done that potential harm to somebody who was really experiencing it in my presence. Um, and at the same time, I very much just thought I was normal. Like it kind of just this is how people are, right?
Right,
Um,
well, because it's your normal,
yeah, very
and
much so.
that's the only experience you've had.
Yeah, the obsessive compulsive parts of the way my brain works are not new. They didn't emerge
Right.
suddenly, but I will say the pandemic created this specific concern that my OCD then obsessed with, which is the
Hmm.
presence of breathing mouths, basically breathing mouths and noses. The
Hmm.
larger the number of noses and mouths, the more difficulty my experience will encounter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want it to be that way. That's just how I feel now. I
Yeah.
can't stay calm
Yeah.
in those spaces. I wish I could.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I certainly know other people like that too, that the reality of things during the pandemic have sort of triggered things for them that, were always present, but were then sort of either ramped up or were made much more specific
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah,
because of
it
that
was like a
experience.
titration. I don't know if you know the term titration, right? But like from chemistry,
Yeah.
where when you trying to titrate, you put like a color indicating uh, liquid, and
Yeah.
basically you slowly increase the acidity or basic nature of a liquid with one drop at a time until it does the color indication you're looking for. Um, and so the pandemic was like starting a titration drip, and some of us needed it to end faster or
Mhm.
be handled more with more extremity early on. And it was for a little bit. I was
Yes.
going to be okay if we had returned to the office with mask mandates and vaccine mandates. I
Mhm.
would have been okay, especially if the mask mandates had maintained for a little while thereafter too. Um,
Yeah.
and then I still might have stayed masked in the office, but at least that like slower ramp up would have helped take the edge off of this experience for me. But because the pandemic wore on and the drip was turned up because the rejection of those accommodative public health decisions by the public and by politicians, those combined to create this untenable obsession with the lack of community care present, the lack of matriarchy, the lack of um, attention to your community, the lack of goodness for
Compassion.
those that have less advantage. Um, and then add to that, the later in the pandemic, I dealt with all sorts of even worse health outcomes than just my mental health stuff alone, um, which is what we talked about last week. That was a good episode, by the way. And I think we're already running long on this one again. So we can start wrapping it up here pretty soon. But anyway, um, I've talked about the cards a lot more than usual today, I think because the reading was aces, if I do say so.
Yeah, it was a powerful reading, like both in terms of um, this OCD discussion, but also in terms of the world right now and what we're all kind of collectively experiencing in the horrors that persist.
So as the horrors do persist, hold your space for yourself. Again, I'm Justin the Wizard, National Board Certified Health and Wellness Coach.
I'm Elena Lunt, and I am just diving into the galactic dumpster of life.
Galaxy Dumpster. Thank you so much for all of your time, and thank you all you viewers out there. Take care.